after the fall of Assad. And my heart ached because people were, flocking. Syrians were flocking from other parts of the world, coming to Damascus. It was absolutely the same for a lot of Iranians who were around the world and after the 1979 revolution.
Now, getting back to your story in Iran, though, I put a pin in this earlier, but I wanted to come back to it. When the day that they took over, or the week that they took over in 1979, how old were you at that time?
12.
Okay. So you can process this.
Oh, absolutely.
It's not like you're 4.
I haven't processed anything since then. It's a sort of an ongoing movie in my head all the time.
What was that like, though? Like the moment they took over and suddenly it's, if you think about it in the cinematic version of life, to me, it's almost like you have a bright day and then cloak of darkness.
I was reading the Grant biography, as I mentioned, and I came upon these few lines by Oliver Wendell Holmes that said, "We shared the incommunicable experience of war. We felt, as we still do, a passion for life. And in our youths, our hearts were touched with fire." And I think that if you replace war with revolution, in that quote by Holmes, you capture the essence of the 1979 experience for the people who lived through it, that year. Now, everybody I know who looks back at 1979 and knows how bad that movie went, how terrible was the outcome of something that so many people had invested so much hope into, looks at it and says, to hell with it, it was all wrong. But at that moment, when we were all feeling, and, I as a kid even, that, there's going to be so much more freedom. And I remember I was, in my memoir, I talk about this one book that I had called The Little Black Fish. And it was the story of this little fish who is in somewhere in a little pool of water and keeps asking his mother that he wants to go to the ocean. And everybody in that little pool of water tells the little black fish, forget about it, there is no ocean, don't even think about the ocean, you can't go to the ocean. And finally, as you know and I know, the little black fish, in fact, goes to the ocean and sees this universe of being free and all these other creatures. And even though it gets killed at the end of the book, it's still very happy that it got out of the little pool. Yes. Now, this was a book my brother had given me and had read to me as a kid. And in fact, it's part of the start of my memoir. And I knew that it was a banned book. And I loved it, but I knew that I couldn't take it out of the house or show it to anyone. Why? Because the little black fish was the metaphor of all of Iran.
Yes.
We were all trapped in this little pool, and we wanted to get out of our little pool and go to the ocean. And the ocean was the place of freedom with all the multiplicity and varieties of creatures that lived in it and blah, blah, right? I really believed that that's what the revolution was going to be, because I'd read that book and I knew that was a banned book and I knew that that's what the nation was trying to do. So in the time that it did take place, there was only excitement in the same way that I look at, the footage that came out of Syria, out of Damascus, within the first week or 2 or 3 after the fall of Assad. And my heart ached because people were, flocking. Syrians were flocking from other parts of the world, coming to Damascus. It was absolutely the same for a lot of Iranians who were around the world and after the 1979 revolution came back thinking that they were going to build the country. And
you thought that, hold on, I'm just asking this because it's relevant to you. Even as someone who is Jewish in Iran, with now a radical Islamic leader taking over, you still thought that? Your parents thought that?
No, my parents didn't.
Okay.
My parents were grieving. My parents were like, they were drawing the curtains, shutting the shutters, locking the doors, going, just huddling together.
And you're like, what the fuck are you doing?
Yeah, exactly. People have asked me because I give book talks and people say, are you stupid? I said, no, I wasn't stupid. I was 12.
Yeah.
And the only thing I and, people like me had going for them, was our youth. Because if we were older, 20, 30 years older, we would know that this isn't something to be excited about, as my parents weren't. But we were young and we had read these books with these metaphors, and it really looked like something much better was going to come.
When did that change for you?
I talked about this recently. I began to feel cracks in that belief as early as March 8th of 1979.
So not long after they took over.
Not long. So what happened on March 8th, 1979? It was International Women's Day. And
can't have that there.
No. Boom! Exactly. For God's sake. Yeah. This is exactly what it was. Yeah. That, there has been a revolution. 2,500 years of history has collapsed. Iran is going through the biggest upheaval, not just of its modern history, but perhaps of all of its history.
Sure.
And this guy who was in exile in a turban is returning to the country to replace somebody with this opulent crown and, everything. And so he comes to the country at the end of January. By February 11th, the Shah is gone, the regime is changed, he's in power. And you would think that there's so much to do, right? There's a military to put together, there's a cabinet to put together, there's like foreign policy to think of, there's domestic policy to think of, there's like, the whole country has access to all these guns because they've gone into these, barracks, and they have, they have taken over the barracks. So everybody has distributed the weapons, and they're all running around with Kalashnikovs everywhere. So you have to make the country safe, reclaim all those weapons. But what does Ayatollah Khomeini begin to talk about? Reinstituting the Islamic dress code laws.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
This is your priority? So, about 2 weeks after he's come to power, he says, I think we need to bring back the mandatory hijab, mandatory Islamic dress code laws. And so on March 8th, 1979, people in Iran take to the streets, women in Iran take to the streets. And some of them have their heads covered with the veil, and some of them look like me. And by the way, the footage of that is available, March 8th, 1979, Iranian women. And it is one of the most astonishing historical footage of all time, because there are women with hijab on the street and women without hijab. And the women with hijab are saying, we are
In 1979.
Yeah, we don't need the volume. Let's keep going. Right.
so the women with the hijab are saying, we are here because we want to protect our sisters and our daughters from another imposition. We are choosing to have the veil, but we want to
want
defend the
rights.
rights of
Yeah,
them being without.
Freedom of choice. Yeah.
Yeah, and as you see, they're all women because with the exception of just some random men among them. And one of the things that they're chanting is, "We didn't make a revolution to go backward." And here I am sitting at home. Obviously, I wasn't there. My parents wouldn't let me, and I only knew that it was happening because I was looking at the news, and I'm looking at the footage. The correspondent who's narrating this event is saying, "These bad women."
Oh, state media.
Exactly. These bad, corrupt women have taken to the streets. And I'm looking at them saying, what makes them corrupt? They look like us.
That's like your mostly peaceful protest moment right there.
Right.
Nothing to see.
And so these women who somehow are bad or corrupt or not good women, the implication of not good women, as which at the time in that cultural context meant they were prostitutes or they were sexual deviants and things. And I'm looking at them, they're nurses, they're teachers, and they're there with union banners, like the union of, medical assistants and nurses and teachers. And why are they saying they're bad? And one of the things that the state media guy was saying was, look at their bracelets. They with the jangle of their bracelets, they are demonstrating. And I'm thinking, what's wrong with bracelets? And so it was at that moment that I, as young as I was, began to think, I can't buy this. I can't quite buy, first and foremost, that these are bad women because I can't see anything bad about them. And I like the women. I like what they're doing. They're saying we didn't make a revolution to go backward in time. And so that was the very first time I questioned it. And that's actually the moment that the Iranian anti-Islamist movement in Iran, in the form of the class of women who joined together, took shape. That from the moment at the inception of the revolution itself, there was also the birth and the inception of the Iranian feminist movement. They didn't know it, but at the time that they took to the streets, which is like 2 weeks after the revolution, the revolution was most beloved. The leader of that revolution was either most beloved or most feared. And no one dared to pose a challenge to him.
Beloved or feared, not hated. Interesting.
Yeah. Right?
Yeah.
And no one dared to cross him, either out of love or out of fear. And yet there were these women who were demonstrating against him.
But they did get sent back to the Dark Ages after this.
Because, they did. Not immediately. Actually, the protests succeeded. And so he later came back and said, oh, well, I was just suggesting it. Right? But within 2 years, when he had completely obliterated everybody else, including the Marxists and the communists who had come to a coalition with him, had completely either driven them into exile or executed them or imprisoned them. When he had firmed his grip on power, he brought back the mandatory dress code.
Thank you guys for checking out this clip. If you haven't already subscribed, please subscribe and hit the like button on this video. It is a huge, huge help. And if you'd like to check out this clip's full podcast episode, that link is in the description below or right here. And finally, you can follow me on Instagram and X by using the links in my description below.